When Doctor Who burst onto the screens in 1963, very few people knew what exactly it was to become. However, a mere 2 short years later, it had dominated British culture, and the UK was in the midst of something referred to as Dalek mania. The Daleks had first appeared as the villains in the second serial of Season 1 called The Daleks, written by Terry Nation and designed by Raymond Cusack. And they were so popular that they were brought back a further 2 times in Season 2, with the Dalek invasion of Earth and The Chase. The Daleks continue to be a popular recurring villain for the show, but many people overlook the media that span off of the show in the 1960s. The company Amicus bought the film rights to the plot of the Daleks after the popularity of the serial, along with 2 sequels for £500. With that, the Doctor Who films began their lives. The films had a number of differences to the TV show. For example, the Doctor was not an alien from some far-off planet, he was a human scientist named Who, hence Doctor Who. Barbara was not Susan's teacher, but rather they were sisters, and the Doctor Who was their grandfather. Ian was also very much himplified in the movie and played Barbara's boyfriend. Doctor Who and the Daleks. This was the first film to be released. It is based off of The Daleks by Terry Nation. Peter Cushing of Grand Moff Tarkin fame played human scientist Doctor Who. The film was written by Milton Scobbosky, directed by Gordon Fleming, and produced by Max Rosenberg and Milton Scobbosky. Ian was played by Roy Castle, Barbara by Jenny Linden, and Susan was played by Roberta Tovey. It was produced with a £180,000 budget and took 6 weeks in total to film. It was filmed in Technicolor, which technically makes it the first Doctor Who story to be in both colour and in widescreen, as the TV series would not start airing in colour until 1970. The music was by Malcolm Locker, which has some of my favourite pieces in there that just exudes nostalgia. The final film was 82 minutes long compared to the 175-minute finished serial. There were some changes made to the design of the Daleks in the film. Most notably, instead of a ray gun, a fire extinguisher was used, and the plunger was replaced by a mechanical claw. They were also painted far more vividly than ever before, mainly because the shift to Technicolor wanted to be highlighted. Originally, the fire extinguisher was going to be a flamethrower, although it was overruled as the writers thought it might be too frightening for children.
Young man, do you know what you have just done? You have transferred us in time and space, and I hadn't even set the controls.
The plot is largely the same as the serial, with the same major beats, although it is far more condensed in the shortened runtime. Doctor Who has created a ship that can be travelled in both space and time. This is called the TARDIS, and when Barbara's bumbling boyfriend accidentally sets it in motion, they find themselves on an alien planet that is half dead. Wanting to explore the planet, Doctor Who takes a fluid link from the ship and pretends it is broken. They find a city of metal, and when they are exploring it, they are taken prisoner by metal creatures known as the Daleks. Slowly dying of radiation sickness from a long-gone war, the Daleks allow Susan to return to the TARDIS to get the radiation sickness medicine. There she meets a Thal, and he gives her more medicine just in case. When she gets back, they make her write a Thal letter offering them food, although unbeknownst to her, it is a trap in order to kill them all. The gang escape by destroying a Dalek and manage to warn the Thals before escaping the city. In order to get their fluid link back, which was taken by the Daleks when they became prisoners, Barbara, Ian and a couple of Thals go by the back while Doctor Who and Susan go in the front. The Daleks try to explode a neutron bomb, but is stopped accidentally by Ian in the end. Happily saving the planet and stopping the Daleks, the gang return home in the TARDIS with the fluid link intact.
You'll look pretty funny wearing that in London.
Hey.
So, the first Peter Cushing film, I really think, is a perfect example of how kind of condensing the story and adapting it really, really works. I think both the films in general approach the way that the story is told in a completely different way. It's so beautiful just to watch this film because it's a really, really aesthetically pleasing film. I just love watching Technicolor, and the Technicolor in this film really, really stands out, and the Daleks, which are painted this bright colours, just work really, really well. And they take a story which was like 7 25-minute episodes, which honestly, as much as the Daleks is a good serial and it's a good story and It's fun, and it introduces this absolute iconic villain. It drags, and I always remember, I've watched it numerous times over the years, and episodes 5 and 6 just don't need to be there at all. That's 50 minutes of just them going through a cave, essentially, and I really don't think that needs it. And although the main plot point are still there in the film, it's reduced in a way that really works to its advantage in the film, and I feel like that's why I actually kind of prefer the film in a way to the serial. Plus, who could overlook that beautiful colouring all the way throughout it, and obviously the music. The music by Malcolm Locker is absolutely outstanding. He really put his whole musical ability into that, and I really appreciate it because it's got some beautiful scoring. I've included a bit in one of the sections there when the Daleks come in, just to show you how kind of nice it is and how it kind of captures the feeling of it quite well. There's also a really nice scene towards the end where they're climbing up the hill before to go into the back of the city, and that's also got one of my favourite suites in the two movies at all. It's just such a beautiful melody, and I would highly go and recommend to listen to the soundtrack if you have time. It's on Spotify, and yeah, so that's another thing that I really enjoyed about that particular film. I think changing Susan into an actual child rather than teenager really works to its advantage as well. The shift in the characters, Barbara is kind of in between for me. I don't really dislike what they did. I really like Barbara and Ian as an original pairing, but after watching it for the third or fourth time, I can really appreciate what they did with it. So you've got Susan, who's an actual child now, which I think fits her character and actions of this film a lot better. And then you've got Barbara, who is her big sister, who they're both very invested in science, which is understandable, of course, if you've got a grandfather who hasn't invented a time and space machine. But then you've got Ian, who is this sort of bumbling fool. I don't know, in a way it's really quite funny, but he also grows on you throughout the film. So at the start you're like, he's really an idiot, but it kind of goes on because he is clever. He's also a lovable idiot that you kind of want to look after and have friends with. So yeah, I think that's how I appreciate the characters. Is what they've done with the characters is quite interesting, but I have to admit my favourite part of the characters is the relationship between the Doctor and Susan, which I think works a lot better when Susan is an actual child rather than a teenager. It melds a lot well, and it just kind of works. So in terms of this particular film, I would probably give it a 4 out of 5. I don't know, I don't tend to rate films the same way I rate books, because I don't actually know that much about films. I'm not a film enthusiast. The only reason I'm doing this is because I love Doctor Who, and so that's what I'm going with. 4 out of 5, thumbs up from me. I would definitely go and recommend that one. The Daleks Invasion Earth, 2150 AD. The Daleks Invasion Earth was adapted from the Doctor Who serial The Dalek Invasion of Earth from Season 2. Peter Cushing and Roberta Tovey both reprised their roles as Doctor Who and Susan respectively. However, the character of Barbara was replaced by Louise, Doctor Who's niece, played by Jill Curzon. The last character to be introduced would take the part of Ian in the original season. This was Tom Campbell, played by Bernard Cribbins. 41 years later, he would go on to play the role of Wilfred Mott in the new series. It was written by Milton Skibosky and David Whittaker, directed by Gordon Fleming, and produced by Milton Skibosky and Max G. Rosenberg. Unfortunately, this film underperformed at the box office, and the opportunity to make a third film from the serial The Chase fell through. It began filming on the 31st of January 1966 and was finished on the 22nd of March. The film had a budget of $286,000, which was 60% larger than the previous film. Similar to that of the serial itself, Peter Cushing fell ill during filming, requiring a series of rewrites delaying it. Fun fact, Sugar Puffs, the cereal, contributed large amounts to the budget and therefore has product placement throughout. The film is in many ways similar to the original serial with a few alterations. For example, the film opens with PC Tom Campbell being attacked by a man who is trying to rob a jewellery shop. In an attempt to get some backup, he rushes to the nearby police box. However, the police box in question belongs to Doctor Who and has his niece and granddaughter in it with him. His injuries, paired with the shock, causes him to faint. While unconscious, he is accidentally taken to the year 2150 AD, and much to his annoyance when he wakes up. They all go outside to explore, and when the TARDIS is caught in a landslide, the four get separated, with the girls going one way and the boys the other. The girls meet up with some resistance fighters who explain the Dalek invasion and their attempts to stop it. The boys see them happening, but get captured by the Daleks before they can find the others. The resistance attacks from a Dalek saucer which has landed in London. In the chaos, Tom and Louise get stuck on the saucer together, while Susan and the Doctor meet up with two different folks who look after them. All four separately make their way to Bedfordshire, where they incite a large rebellion between the Daleks and the humans, resulting in the Dalek spaceship getting pulled into the core of the Earth and destroying all the remaining Daleks on Earth. Next, we've got the Dalek Invasion Earth 2150 AD. Now, it's actually been a while since I watched this one. I didn't really watch this one as obsessively as I watched the first one growing up, so it was definitely, I don't know, what's the word, interesting to kind of revisit it. I think I only watched it a couple of handful of times as a child. Bernard Cribbins, first off and foremost, is great in it. I find him absolutely hilarious for some reason that he did this and then went on to be Wilf in the later series. We've got, again, the Technicolor in this doesn't feel quite as bright and as beautiful or that kind of thing as it does in Daleks and the Doctor Who and the Daleks. I think that's because of the changing setting. So instead of being it on their planet with the radioactive plants and all that kind of stuff, it's now on Earth. It's in London, and it's a broken down London at that. It's a kind of shambolic half shell sort of thing. So I think that really kind of takes away from a lot of the prettiness of the first film. So the second film isn't quite as aesthetically pleasing. The music is still very, very good. Quite a lot of it is reused, which I probably understandable. I don't really know much about the orchestral themes of the 60s, but I imagine that you wouldn't have that much money on it. And the music is good from the first one, so I can respect that they kind of changed little bits of variations and stuff like that on it and kind of made it a bit different. The characters in this one, you don't have, obviously, Barbara anymore. You've got Louise, which is the cousin or the niece or whatever it is again, I can't remember. And you've got Bernard Cribbins as Tom Campbell. So instead of Tom Campbell being the one where Susan runs away with in the end of the invasion of Earth, you have him as the policeman that comes in, kind of a replacement as for Ian. And of course, Susan still being a child, she doesn't leave at the end of this one because there's no ongoing saga. It's just kind of like spots in it. So you've kind of got that interesting. Louise, Barbara, very, very similar as characters. It could be written as the exact same character. So, I don't particularly mind that replacement either. No, I did really quite like that Barbara's actress from the first one. The second one, as Louise, did pick up quite well. Fun fact, the actual ending for this film kind of gets confused with the ending of the serial quite a lot. So a lot of people believe that the serial ends with the magnetic force of the spaceship coming in and exploding and killing all the Daleks, when it's not actually, and that's like one of the most common myths around this serial and this film. The endings get confused, and I forgot that even happened, and I got to the end and went, wait a minute, this is not how it ended in the serial. But it's a good story. I think I prefer the serial for this one, I think. Not because I think it didn't do it as well, but because there's just so many good parts in the invasion of Earth which I prefer. So like, got the speech at the end from the Doctor to Susan, you've got Barbara and her friends, the Tom Campbell, going in the sewers, all that. I think that kind of adventure is a lot more enjoyable. Ian and his wee side quests, defeating a evil dragon, I can't even remember what that was. But in this one, you've got them just kind of slowly making their way to Berkshire with different people. Louise and Tom are in a spaceship, the Doctor's with someone, Susan's with someone, and they all eventually get there, and then they kind of end it. So I do understand why this was kind of the weaker of the two films, because I think it is the weaker of the two films, but I don't think that means it's bad, and I think it does. I still really enjoy watching it, and there's a really funny bit where they get up and like they do a kind of weird synchronized dance routine for some reason with the music in the background when they're in the spaceship, and I don't know why I find that so funny. It's like one of my favourite parts of this film. So for this one, I'm going to give it a solid 3 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed the first one a lot more, but this one was also really enjoyable and a lot better than some films out there. So if you've got time, I watched them back to back, if you wanted to, but if you don't, go for the first one. I would recommend it. There are quite another number of non-film pieces of media out there featuring Cushing Doctor, so I actually attempted to get my hands on as many of them as physically possible, but quite a lot of them are out of print or old copies of comics or novels, or just extraordinarily expensive, which I'm not rich, I can't afford all these things. So when I haven't managed to get a physical copy, I tried to get an electronic copy and read it and kind of go through it and see what it was like. So I couldn't get a hold of one comic from the 1960s. I'm still holding out hope that I'll be able to get it eventually, so if I do, I'll post like a mini update for it, but let's just get into what I've actually got. And that is a number of short stories and comics about this. So a number of those short stories and the Day of the Doctor novelisation created the idea that the films were in universe, with the two films being adapted from the stories of Barbara and Ian when they got back. There's also another quite a train of thought throughout a couple of these stories which suggests that Doctor Who was a real human scientist in the Doctor Who universe, created by the Doctor in order to create a monster, which I'll talk about in a bit. So, first of all, let's start with Peaceful Thals Ambushed. Peaceful Thals Ambushed was a short story printed in issue 28 of the 21st Century TV comics. This is essentially an in-universe prequel to Doctor Who and the Daleks, with a couple of references to the real Doctor's fictionalised account of the real adventures taking place in the wider Doctor Who universe. This idea of the Cushing's Doctor being an inverse fictionalised version of the Doctor was kind of further expanded upon in the Day of the Doctor novelisation by Stephen Moffat. There's nothing really much to say about it other than it's an advert in the form of a fictionalised news bulletin from the planet Scarrow. It goes on to state that the film is being broadcast, which is based on that news bulletin. I actually had a lot of trouble trying to find this thing, because I found a copy of the magazine, which was from 1965, and I couldn't actually figure out where the story was supposed to be. Everything that it kind of talked about was it talking about like a short story, so I just assumed that it would be like prose. But it wasn't. It was more like this news bulletin, this kind of advert for it. So it's deliberately stylized as an advert, but it's a short story. So it's quite interesting as a piece of media, and I mean, I wouldn't recommend it or anything. It's a bit short, not really worth all the hassle I went to try and find it. But it was fun nonetheless to have a look at and see what it was like. And it was fun trying to hunt down a weird, obscure 1965 comic that nobody really cares about anymore. But hey-ho. The third motion picture. So this is another short story written by Tim Quinn and Dickie Howett. It was released in 1967, I believe, and it's a parody of the Doctor Who movie scripts. So the movie scripts for Cushing. with the premise being that it's the third movie in the series. So in this story, Peter Cushing has been trying everything in his power to stop the third movie getting released. However, the unfinished script is out there, and it begins with Susan and Barbara being told that Doctor Who has been found in the street, confused and befuddled. Realising that they might be getting too old, they decide to send him to a nursing home, while Ian stands in the back dressed as a clown. In order to pick up the Doctor, they take the TARDIS, which dematerialises with the sound of a revving motorbike. They meet up with Doctor Who doesn't actually recognise them, and introduces them to his friend Harry, who is a lackadaisical hippie. Susan decides that he's a Yeti, so then tries to kill him with a wooden stake and a hammer before he actually manages to escape. Then Susan decides it's actually time to kill the real enemy, which is the scriptwriter, and the last line is a rather ominous stage direction describing Susan turning on the writer himself. This is one of these early stories to be purposefully both a complete farcical parody of Doctor Who. Whether or not it's successful is a different matter, and also something that's quite fourth wall breaking. There's quite a lot of references in here between what was actually going on in Doctor Who at the time. So when it was written, it was the second Doctor facing off as the Yeti, which was a repeating monster in his kind of series, and obviously Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, etc, etc. I can't entirely say I enjoyed this one too much. It is what it is, I suppose, and it's quite weird to read about because it's in the form of a script, but it's just completely doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it's just a bit bizarre. I wouldn't really recommend it, and I didn't really enjoy it, but I'm sure somebody who might be a little bit more well versed of the pop culture references at the time might be able to pick up on a few more references that I didn't get, because I got the obvious ones, but other than that, I didn't really. Doctor Who and the House on Alldark Moor. So, next up is another short story called Doctor Who and the House on Alldark Moor. It's a short story by Justin Richards and is part of a collection called Short Trips and Sidesteps, which was released in the year 2000. It's set straight after the first film, Doctor Who and the Daleks, with quite a lot of references to the story The Romans, which kind of is an indication that Doctor Who experienced a similar adventure to that kind of thing. So, Doctor Who, Susan, Ian and Barbara end up on a moor where they find a woman sleepwalking. They take the woman, Veronica, back to her husband, Count Harkin, who offers them shelter for the night. At midnight, Susan wakes up after hearing a noise and her and Ian go investigating. They find a murdered servant, and due to Ian's squealing, Doctor Who and Barbara both wake up. The noise that Susan hears ends up being the Count Tarkin, who has apparently locked himself away in the attic. However, when trying to find a way to break the door open, they come down to the laboratory to find the real Count Tarkin is actually sitting there. He explains that he's got some insane brother up in the attic, kind of Jane Eyre style. So the brother has escaped from the attic and is trying to explain that he's actually the real Tarkin, and then the one in front of him is actually a clone, and then it starts attacking him. The house is set on fire, and while trying to escape, the gang gets separated from Tarkin and Veronica, and they meet outside and the gang leaves. But inside the fire, Tarkin and Veronica are found at last, and the Count is trying to protect his wife. So there's two main references throughout it, and both are linked to the Peter Cushing roles. Tarkin is obviously referenced as Star Wars character, Count Tarkin, and the plot is a homage to Hammer Horror, which Cushing was quite adamantly involved with, along with Christopher Lee. And there's quite a lot of kind of gothic overtones, which is why I think I probably enjoyed this one so much. I'm a big fan of the way Justin Richards writes, and some of my favourite Doctor Who books are by him. So I don't think it's any surprise that when he tries to do a kind of gothic story that I would really enjoy it. It's just a short, sweet, somewhat removed from the Doctor Who universe, but something that I really enjoyed, and it's just kind of dripping with that gothic horror atmospheric vibes. You've got the moor, you've got the darkness, you've got this crazy person in the attic. Beautiful. Love it. The 5 o'clock Shadow. So The 5 o'clock Shadow was a short story written by Neff Fountain and was published in the anthology Short Trips, A Day in the Life. It's almost entirely written in rhyming couplets, and it references other companions of the First Doctor, including John and Gillian. John and Gillian were companions that existed in the TV comics alone, by the way, in case you didn't know that. So the short story has also referenced the fact that Doctor Who and Susan could be kind of in-universe characters themselves, but also they could be fictionalised or created by the Doctor. So essentially Doctor Who is reading Susie a story as she goes to bed. However, something has gone wrong with the TARDIS and they're trying to figure out what's going on. However, in the middle of the story, the 5 o'clock story, an incarnation of the Doctor's angst is facing reality is released and tries to torment them, while dramatically monologuing about eldritch horrors. It explains to Susan that she's actually only a mathematical code of the perfect companion to the Doctor, and that she is one of thousands of such creatures. The creature also reveals that Doctor Who is another construct, this time of the Doctor himself, and they were a distraction so that the real Doctor could fix the TARDIS and get himself to safety. This is a very, very bizarre story, to say the least. It's quite strange, and it kind of collides to form a kind of strange Lovecraftian parody, where in the form of the couplets, the rhyming couplets, just kind of was almost like a bit of a fever dream, especially if you read it quite late at night. It did get me somewhat more enthusiastic about the characters of John and Gillian, which I haven't been too enthused about, and we keep meaning to try and read their comics with it in it, but I just kind of keep putting it off. So this might be the final push to have a look into their comics and start looking at them and seeing what they're like. Daleks versus the Martians. Daleks vs. the Martians was a comic strip that was published in the Doctor Who Spring Special in 1996, written by Alan Barnes. It was set up as a prequel to the Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. So Doctor Who, Susan and Louise are exploring in a Martian Sphinx when they're captured by the Daleks. They are preparing to invade Earth, and with the help of the native Martians, the gang escapes with the Martian robot destroying the Dalek base. It's very sweet and simple prequel to the second film, but otherwise pretty middle of the road. It is what it is. It's just sort of there. But it's a fun insight into what could have been if they'd done more. And so that kind of brings us to the end of the Peter Cushing era. I really do love Cushing as an actor, and I think one of the highlights of this whole thing is just Susan and Doctor Who's relationship and how they kind of bounce off each other. There's something about that I just love it. And they aren't brilliant works of art or anything, but they're a quite pleasant way to spend a couple of hours. This video actually took me a couple of months to get out. I kept doing it and then deleting it and then doing it and doing it and doing it again. And I was hoping to get it out in March originally, and then I was hoping to get it out when the Double Bill premiered in the cinema last week. But then I got a really, really bad throat infection, which means I couldn't actually speak. And then I got sunstroke, which, as you can see, my nose is so red. So I apologise on behalf of my nose for how red it is. I look like Rudolph, but unfortunately I got sunstroke, so I'm just going to have to live with it. So thank you much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you've watched or read or listened to any Peter Cushing films to do with Doctor Who, what do you think about them? Leave a comment below, and hopefully we'll have season 3 up and ready to go very, very shortly. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.